Welcome to this special webinar presented in collaboration between the U.S. Air Force Band of the West and the College Music Society and the NAMM Foundation. This webinar is part of the NAMM GenNext program's Believe in Music Week, which seeks to support students through exposure to career opportunities and promote discussion of current issues in music industry and education. I'm Senior Airman Ed Knoeckel, pianist and auditions coordinator in the Band of the West. In this presentation, you will hear from members of the Band of the West as they discuss various ways that they have overcome challenges through the pandemic in a military band. In particular, we are discussing ways that skills outside of musical performance have aided in adjusting to pandemic-related challenges. We'll hear about adjusting for maximized social media engagement, developing video production skills, reaching students and young professionals for auditions, implementing new technology for recording, and organizational leadership. Many thanks to Bill Pelto, Executive Director of the College Music Society, Mary Lurston, Executive Director of the NAMM Foundation, to Claire Krager-Boas, Senior Project Manager with NAMM, as well as to the Band of the West leadership, Major Doyle, Lieutenant Michael Flynn, and Chief Brian Hornbuckle. The band's leadership core is committed to reaching the public, serving our nation, and providing opportunities for the country's finest musicians. We hope that you will enjoy this presentation, whether you are a music student, an educator, or a practitioner looking for ways to lead your organization through the current arts climate, or looking to understand more about the Air Force bands. We hope that this hour will inspire you to innovate and take next steps in your own pursuits. Now, a special word for students watching this webinar. Strive to intentionally take away at least one thing that you can use to develop your craft and approach with engaging with the world around you. Each panel member, in addition to being a musician, also provides non-music performance-based leadership related to engagement with the public through music. Today's panel includes Major Dustin Doyle, commander and conductor of the Band of the West, Master Sergeant Nicholas Wellman, audio engineer, who also spearheads the finance shop, Staff Sergeant Jaime Parker, trombonist, who is the director of productions, Staff Sergeant Justis MacKenzie, our staff arranger, who directs social media engagement activities, and Staff Sergeant Michele VonHaugg, clarinetist, who has been the band's auditions coordinator throughout the pandemic. Today's format will cover short presentations from each of the panelists, followed by a discussion period at the end. I would welcome attendees to log your questions in the chat section of this platform. Also, if you are streaming from somewhere in the United States or outside of the continental US, we would love to know where you are tuning in from. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce our first panelist. Staff Sergeant Justis MacKenzie is the staff arranger of the U.S. Band of the West. He is also a tubist and holds a bachelor's degree from the Eastman School of Music and a master's degree from Rice University. He's toured the world with stage productions like Blast, among other theater production tours. He has been an enlisted member in the U.S. Air Force Band since 2015 and was previously assigned to the U.S. Air Force Band of Flight at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. It is great to have you with us, Justis. Would you please tell us a little bit about your role, what it's been in the Air Force, and how you've adapted through the pandemic to support the band's mission?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Ed. As you all heard, in addition to my job as the music arranger for the Band of the West, I manage our social media presence on 6 platforms, which you might hear and think, okay, so you post stuff, you make posts. But it's actually many jobs rolled into one. I'm the strategist, the analyst, the community manager, the content manager, designer, developer, the marketing director. It's a lot. But social media has been really key to our engagement, particularly during the pandemic. 79% of Americans are on social media. And it's really helpful for us because it costs us the same to reach one person, for example, here where we're based in San Antonio, as it does to reach another person that might be in Florida, because it's all just online outreach. Or it might cost us the same to reach everyone, a ton of people, if your video goes really viral. And so social media is a really important tool, but it can be overwhelming, never more so than at the beginning of the pandemic. March, April 2020 was a real firestorm for us. And unfortunately, my jobs as the arranger and social media manager do adapt well to a distributed work environment. But the Band of the West particularly at the outset of the pandemic, was all about staying connected when our peer organizations were going dark because they couldn't perform. And what that meant for us was creating music videos. And our productions manager is going to talk to you more about that a little later. But from the social media side, we had a directive to post a new music video every single day, which was a pace that was really unprecedented. And we maintained that for 122 straight days, which, as I mentioned, was quite a firestorm. Um, After that, we started to catch our breath, talking about May and June. And I started to think about how we can put more structure into our content release strategy. And also started to realize that on social media, we were kind of reaching the same people over and over again, right? Namely, our followers. And that's a big contrast from our live touring, where obviously, if we send our jazz band to Louisiana, they're going to reach different folks than if we sent that jazz band to Georgia, for example. And at the same time, people were spending way more time on social media during the pandemic. So, how do we meet them where they are? And the answer to that was live stream performances. Number one, all of the major social media platforms have algorithms that favor live content over organic, just posted content. And also for the Air Force bands, a key component to our mission is interaction. It's connection, back and forth engagement, not just we're going to play at you for a while and you listen. So we needed to figure out a way to do live streamed gigs. And the answer for that was a open source software we use called Open Broadcaster Software, or OBS. And it allows us to put a few of our airmen on screen and act as the hosts for a concert featuring our music videos. It's kind of like a watch party of our music videos. But with our airmen live hosting, and they're able to chat with audience members in real time, giving us that interactive component that really sets us apart from other organizations that were just uploading musical content. This software and doing live stream performances negates venue closures. It negates public health concerns, manning shortages in our own organization. And it allows for a lot more creative programming because our music directors are able to pull content from other ensembles. So, for example, if our brass quintet traditionally had been sent out to Mississippi to perform for people there, and they wanted to play something by our rock band, for example, well, they couldn't do that because the rock band didn't go on that tour with them. But if the music director of the brass quintet said, I think it'd be really appropriate for this performance in particular, this audience in particular, he could just play a video by the rock band. And that allows us to program really creatively. It allows us to tailor our programs to audiences that we're trying to reach. Open Broadcaster Software, OBS, while it's not exactly idiot proof, it does have a lot of functionality for performing arts organizations. And I mean, if I can figure it out, I'm sure you can too. And it's a great way to share your content and be able to, like I said, get that interactive component along with pushing out your musical content to people beyond just your followers. Another thing I want to talk about is our choice of platforms. Facebook is still king in social media world, but we were looking at the metrics after our first couple months of shifting to this 100% digital mission. And our average watch time on Facebook was about 15 seconds, which is good. That's actually par for the course on Facebook. But on YouTube, our average watch time was 2 minutes and 41 seconds. And when we did these live stream performances, which are feature length, 45 minutes to an hour, our average watch time on those was 15 minutes. So we're getting a lot more meaningful views on YouTube, and we knew we wanted to push that out. So that was definitely a part of growing through the pandemic, was learning which platforms are the most useful for us and how we can reach our audiences and engage them more meaningfully. Lastly, we also started a Discord server. And if you're not familiar with Discord, I don't blame you. It's still a very new platform. It was for me, but it allows for more interactive chat. And not only that, it's very popular with our younger demographics, which is a really key component for us to reach. It allows for a conversation, and people can get on our server and ask us questions at any time, a time that's convenient for them. They don't have to wait for us to schedule a show and be there and be live and wait for their questions. So they can connect with us on their own time. And that's been really important for our connecting. And Connect is one of our mission pillars. So these tools, OBS, new social media platforms, live streams, they can never replace live performances, right? I mean, wouldn't we like to be face-to-face right now? But they are helping us modernize for the digital era, and we hope to continue expanding these tools to that end.
Justis, thank you so much for the time and the insights that you've given us today. I'm sure that these are going to be very helpful details and bits of information that will help people out there, whether or not they're organizing their own music ensembles or they're performers themselves, to navigate through some of the new social media terrain that's out there for their organization. And thank you. Maybe they also didn't realize the details in the scope of what using social media for engaging with the public looks like. So thank you again, Justis, for your time.
Thanks, Ed.
Now I'd like to move on to Staff Sergeant Jaime Parker. Jaime Parker holds a bachelor's degree in trombone performance from the University of Central Florida and a master's degree in trombone performance and jazz studies at the University of Northern Colorado. He enlisted into the Air Force in 2012 and has since served as the music director of the Band of the West's large band, the big band, Dimensions in Blue. And he was also the operations representative for the band's large ensembles. He currently serves as director of productions while also fulfilling engagements as an active performer and clinician in the San Antonio area. Jaime, thank you. Welcome. Thanks for being here. Could you tell us a little bit about what your role has been in the band, defining it, and talking about the ways you've adapted to the pandemic to help support the band's mission?
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, great to be here. If I could title my little segment here, I would call it Producing Content. You can do it too. So this is going to be a little bit of a pep talk, kind of geared toward those who haven't had a lot of experience producing content. And it's the same pep talk that I gave over time to our members at the beginning of the pandemic, to help them get started producing content. As Justis just mentioned, we had what we call a content demon for social media, feeding the content demon and coming up with videos on a regular basis. And we could quickly see when all this started that, myself being the official video editor for the Band of the West and maybe one other person was not going to be able to keep up. We couldn't have all that content bottlenecking with me as the only video editor. So we needed help. And the easiest way for us to get some help was to look to our own members. And it was pretty easy to ask around and say, hey, does anyone else have these skills? And we were also very fortunate to have some dedicated audio engineers as part of our unit, one of whom you're going to hear from soon. And so that side of it, we had some help already. But with the video editing, we were able to identify a few people that could help out right away. And then some folks who were willing to learn. And then that left the vast majority of the unit who had no idea and wasn't really comfortable volunteering to create content from home. However, we needed everyone to be able to produce content because we're an ensemble and everyone is in a group here of some kind. We have 10 ensembles, give or take, in the Band of the West, and everyone has a role to play musically. So if everyone's stuck at home, we need each and every person to be able to produce content. So my challenge was in empowering others to create content. And I'm hoping I can give you some lessons today about that. Rather than getting into the weeds, I just want to talk about some general concepts. And a lot of it has to do with attitude. And my challenge was changing musicians' attitudes who have not had a lot of experience producing content from home, that they can do it. And you can do it too. And the folks in your organization can do it too. And so one of the ways that I did that was to create some instructional videos. And in a moment, we're going to play a little clip from one, and we'll talk about it later. But the idea behind this video was to tell people that if you know a few small concepts you can drastically improve the quality of your audio or video without the need for a lot of special equipment or anything like that. So let's take a look at that video.
Are you a musician who's not used to recording yourself from home? Maybe you're feeling a little frustrated because you feel like you don't have the knowledge or the equipment to get the best possible recordings. Fortunately, there's some really easy things we can do to level up the quality of our home recordings. I'm Staff Sergeant Jaime Parker.
All right. So as you can see there, our hero was having some trouble recording himself at home with his cell phone. And the video goes on to describe 5 specific audio tips that you can use to immediately improve your quality of your content without needing anything special. Just knowing a few easy things really can bring up the quality. And the idea is to get you started. And just let you, with whatever you've got on hand, start making some content. You've got to start somewhere. And the skills involved are easier to learn than you might think. When people come to me asking, how do I do this audio thing? How do I do this video thing? I say, well, I could tell you, but you'd be better off just YouTubing it. YouTube it, dude. That was something I repeated many, many times to my colleagues, because it's better to teach yourself how to do these things. And most of you probably know you can learn to do almost anything from YouTube. And it really is true with this world as well. And the expensive equipment side of it is another point that I wanted to make, is that you don't really need that. You can do something with a cell phone that looks and sounds really great. And you can build on that from there and get some fancy equipment later. And then also the same is true with software. There's a ton of free software out there. Your computer might have come with something like GarageBand or iMovie, but there's also free software you can download. And there's stuff that you don't even have to download. Like you can edit audio on Twisted Wave, which is a website, and you can record and edit audio right on there without downloading a thing. So there's a ton of free software available. And the final point that I tried to make to my colleagues is that audio and video editing skills and being able to record yourself from home are really an important part of any musician's skill set, because not only can you create content, as we've been talking about, you can also use it to analyze your own playing. If you record a quartet of you playing with 4 versions of yourself, you're going to learn a lot about your playing really fast. All your intonation tendencies and any other flaws in your playing are going to become readily apparent to you. So it's a great thing to add to your skill set. And another thing that I impressed on folks is you don't need to be perfect. Just get it really good and be happy with it. It doesn't have to be perfect, and then build on it. Repeat that process and continue generating content. And continue improving upon that content each time you make it. And before you know it, you're going to be generating amazing videos. And so that's pretty much what my role has been this entire time. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Jaime, for that. Thank you for all the hard work you have on your plate that you do all the time in productions. I'm sure that this content that you just presented will be very inspiring to those who are attending this session, and perhaps elicit some questions as well as inspire them to take next steps in innovating their own pursuits.
Thank you.
As that's wraps up, I'd like to move on to our next panelist. This will be Staff Sergeant Michele VonHaugg. Now, Michele is a clarinetist in the Band of the West, and for 3 years, she served as the auditions coordinator, navigating auditions through the COVID era. She has a bachelor's degree in music education from Ithaca College and a master's in clarinet performance from the New England Conservatory of Music. After an initial enlistment in 2001, she founded the nonprofit Daraja Music Initiative and toured the world advocating for equity in music education. She's been with the Band of the West since 2017. Michele, thanks for being here. Would you talk us through the traditional processes of auditions and how you've spearheaded auditions to take innovative and adaptive measures through the pandemic.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ed. Okay, so let's go back a little bit. Prior to the pandemic, an audition for the Air Force Band would look pretty much like a typical audition for a symphony orchestra or touring ensemble. Vacancies are posted on the web, resumes and pre-screen recordings are submitted, and then qualified candidates are invited to a multi-round in-person audition. Now, typically, around 10 to 20 candidates would be invited to a live audition. But when the United States declared a public health emergency last February, the bands canceled all auditions. When I say bands, I am referring actually to 11 premier and regional bands that are in 11 destinations in this country and around the world. So in total, the Air Force provides jobs for 583 musicians, arrangers, and audio engineers. So as the pandemic continued through the spring, we started losing critical personnel to retirements and separations. And the idea that we could sit out the entire pandemic without a live audition became unthinkable. Now, by May, the bands had 75 projected vacancies. That's 13% of the entire career field. Now, with the help of our staff arrangers like Sergeant MacKenzie, the music mission was still possible, and the loss would have been manageable, except that some specific jobs, like audio engineer, was predicted to be at about 70% vacant. There would soon be units with literally no audio engineer support. And by unit, I am referring to what would be an entire band in one location. It's comprised of about 65 members that make up the rock bands, the jazz bands, the wind quintets, the clarinet quartets, and various ensembles throughout, all of which depend upon the audio engineers for support. So on the second slide here, you can see exactly which positions we have available in the Air Force bands. Auditions for many of these positions are multifaceted, including the expectation of proficiency in several styles of music. A pianist, for example, is expected to be equally proficient as a classical, a jazz, and a rock performer. So a live audition, you can imagine, would include performance with our classical, our jazz, and a rock ensemble. So in early March of 2020, the auditions teams at 6 different band locations, including leadership at those bands and leadership at the Pentagon, came together to start formulating a plan of how we could hold live in-person auditions through the pandemic. So we started with the CDC guidelines as well as current research on musical instruments and aerosol production. And that helped us to start creating the safest possible environment for everyone involved in the audition process. The first in-person audition was held in August. And since then, the career field has held 18 auditions with 19 job offers, saving literally dozens of ensembles from shutdown. So let's get into the specific ways that the Band of the West made this happen. Our Safe Practices Plan allows for only 5 candidates in the building per audition day. So we needed to really target audiences beyond our traditional advertising practices. So typically auditions are advertised by flyer on appropriate websites, and then we wait and hope for the best results. Now, sometimes this method results in 0 qualified applicants. And since our goal was to bring in 5 finalist level for each audition, we needed to do more. So first, we started with the band productions team, and we started creating commercials for each vacancy. The commercials feature members of the unit, so you have a chance to hear them perform as well as hear directly from the musicians of why they were interested in the job and why you might be interested in the job. And then next, we wanted our potential candidates to have an opportunity to ask questions about the audition and the job. So we worked alongside Sergeant MacKenzie to craft a 5-part live streamed auditions Q&A. Then we took all of that one step further. Since we know that the number one way that Air Force Band musicians say that they have heard about the job is through word of mouth, we wanted to really capitalize on that. So we went and we collected the collegiate data from hundreds of Air Force Band members, and then we used that data to target specific studios at colleges, universities, and conservatories through attractive email campaigns that would also advertise for upcoming live stream events. So after all this, when the submissions started coming in, the next step was to narrow in on those 5 finalist level candidates from the applicants. So we decided to add one virtual round to the pre-screen submission round. And for this idea, we have to thank the Army Field Band. They had already been doing virtual auditions, and we reached out to them, and they walked us through the process, and we think it really worked for us in this way. I'll give you an example of how we did it. So we had a bassoon audition, and we had 13 applicant packages that stood out as live audition qualified. Those 13 applicants were then invited to do a virtual audition over Zoom. Each candidate was asked to record the material submitted in their pre-screen recording, all in one take. That's the key, all in one take during a Zoom call. The candidate was asked to use the same recording device that they had used to submit their original pre-screen materials. And then they were also asked to refrain from any edits. After the call, that candidate had 1 hour to email the recording to the auditions coordinator. The auditions coordinator then sent the recordings containing no personally identifiable information to retain the integrity of a blind round. That we then sent that out to a screening committee who chose 5 of the top candidates from those 13 recordings. When we did that process, 4 of whom, those bassoon players, came to audition, 2 were hired, and just those 2 hires alone filled 67% of that current vacancy, which prevented 2 wind quintets from shutdown. So let's move on to the live audition. Okay, of course, we have all the obvious we hope are obvious expectations in place as far as staying safe during the pandemic. Temperature checks are required upon entry to the building. Masks are always worn right up until playing an instrument. There's always a minimum of 6 foot of social distancing, and then our candidates are always surrounded by plexiglass. And then one key additional step we have in there is we tried to reduce our ensembles as much as possible, and grateful to have arrangers that we can do that, but also because our musicians, we have many musicians who can perform while masked. So we tried to use them as much as possible. Okay, now at the Band of the West, we are very fortunate to have great facilities. So we're able to minimize those musicians in the space by also utilizing rooms that exist around the audition space. In this slide here, you can see where the front of the room is, and there is a trumpet player behind plexiglass. This picture was taken during a trumpet audition. Behind that trumpet player is the audio engineer central command, I'll call it. Now there are several rooms that surround that room as well. So our audio engineers can tap into those rooms. And what you can't see in this picture is that we can also put a large television screen into this recording space so that the musicians in the space can then communicate with musicians that emit aerosols while performing are located in other rooms. Another important thing to point out here is that we reduce the auditions, the multi-round auditions, into one single round. So each musician did perform all rounds, but all in one, essentially 35 to 45 minute maximum take. And since our safe practices plan only allows for 8 members on the in-person panel, the audio engineer is here. You can see the audio engineer mixing the sound there. The audio engineer is also recording. Everything is happening here so that our remote panel, who's all located safely at home, can listen to that mix and then come into a Zoom meeting with the rest of the in-person panel later in the day. Okay. Now, outdoors is always key whenever possible. We, of course, in San Antonio, Texas, do have the luxury of having great weather a lot of the time. In this photo, this is an audio engineer audition. Most of that audition was conducted outdoors, but we also do put as many other elements of the audition process outdoors as we can. Now, naturally, we're not going to ask a bassoon player, for example, to play their audition outdoors, but we can ask the bassoon candidates who will be offered a job to come outdoors during the last portion of the audition, which is conversation, communication with the leadership team. Okay, now this last photo here is a doozy. Who can remember a time when 3 vocalists could stand shoulder to shoulder and sing into the same microphone together while thousands of people sat shoulder to shoulder in stands around them? This is just, this photo is just really an awesome reminder of where hopefully we will be again soon. But I want to say that probably the most important piece of this live audition during a pandemic puzzle is that every step of the way during this process, the safety of the musicians, the candidates, and the public was really the #1 priority. Every candidate who was qualified for a live audition is given the opportunity to decline with the promise that they will certainly have their audition fulfilled at a later date. And the reason for that is we want people to feel safe to come, and people have 100 reasons why it is not safe or appropriate for them to travel during this time. I'll give you one quick example. We had a musician planning to travel from Chicago. Well, Chicago implemented a 2-week mandatory quarantine after traveling to another state. Well, this particular musician called us and said, hey, if I come to the audition, which I really want to, I'm going to come home. I can't work for 2 weeks. If I don't work for 2 weeks, I literally can't pay my rent. Obviously, we're not expecting that person to travel. What we would try to do in situations like that is try to create, if there's a band located within driving distance within the same state, we've been very successful at making that happen. We had a singer in LA who, LA is really where things are the worst right now, I believe, in this country. And this singer was wanted to fly to Texas, but not really an option during the pandemic. And we didn't think it was a good idea. So we created a situation where they could drive to the band in California to make that audition happen. And that singer was offered a job. So it's great on both sides. So I think my time is up here. This has been a really incredible process. And thank you, Ed, for having the auditions team be part of it.
Fantastic, Michele. Thank you so much for your time and all the efforts and energy that you've put into securing career opportunities through these uncertain times. I hope that students out there and faculty instructors will take note of a lot of the things that you just presented to us.
Thanks, Ed.
You're welcome. Thank you. Next up from our panelists is Master Sergeant Nick Wellman. In addition to being the head audio engineer for the Band of the West, he has also served as the section chief of resources. He has served overseas and throughout the Middle East. From 2009 to 2016, he was the audio engineer for the Ramstein Air Base in Germany before returning to his initial duty station of Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio. He completed an Associate's in Applied Science, Audio and Recording Technology from Northeast Community College in Nebraska in the year 2000. And because of his extensive expertise in the field, Master Sergeant Wellman also serves as the technical lead for the Regional Band Audio Engineer career field. He has been serving the U.S. Air Force since the year 2000. And Nick, you've had your hands in a lot of developments that have taken place in the music career field through technology, as well as, of course, here with the Band of the West. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the decisions you've had to make, both on a resource side and on an engineering side throughout the pandemic, so that the band could keep moving forward with its Air Force mission?
Absolutely. Yeah. So thank you, Ed. I appreciate you having me here today. So as the lead audio engineer for our unit, I worked with my teams to purchase equipment, to create plans, programs, and develop some training products, which would allow us to mix and edit at home. We did that in cooperation with Sergeant Parker and the productions team. So what that did for us was allow us to work in this new unforeseen environment and work towards a successful model that's carried us into the future. In my role as the section chief of resources for the band, I'm charged with managing the budget and the equipment that helps the band to achieve its mission as well. So to give some context in everything that we've done, I want to start off by just looking at how the pandemic affected our operations. So like everybody else in our industry, the COVID-19 pandemic changed absolutely everything about what we normally do. In my 20 years in the Air Force Band career field, live music, it's always been the way that we have been able to accomplish the Air Force Band's mission. And those missions are honoring veterans and active duty military members, inspiring future generations to patriotism and serving their country, and then connecting with the American public. We also produce recordings. However, those recording projects were usually infrequent, and that recording process was a lot more foreign to us. So as we pivoted to face the challenges of meeting our audiences in their homes, I worked with my resources team to reallocate all of our travel budget, since that was no longer usable. And that travel budget, it typically accounts for about 65% of our total annual budget. And we use that money to pinpoint the equipment, the training, and the advertising resources that we felt necessary to carry out this new mission set. So in addition to all of that, we shifted from being live sound engineers to home recording engineers. And it might sound funny, but that honestly turned out to be a lot more difficult than I ever thought it would be. So finally, we also had to train our musicians on the best practices that would help them to achieve professional audio products while recording from their living rooms and bedrooms at home. So in this set of images here, you can kind of see the stark contrast that was felt in the music industry generally, but then also for us specifically in military bands. The top leftmost photo is of our rock band performing in 2019 for thousands of kids live on stage. The second photo, the one just below and to the right of that, is a recording session that we took place in our recording studio in February of 2020, just before the pandemic hit. And you can see our musicians are all in the same room, recording right next to each other. So in March of 2020, live concerts and live engineering, it all came to an abrupt halt. And that led to editing and mixing productions at home, like all of the Brady Bunch style virtual band and choir videos that started to emerge all over social media. So we knew that we needed to move into an online format, but how exactly did we facilitate that change from our old way of doing things to this new way? Well, essentially, we had to identify and overcome several challenges in order to bring our social media and television products up to the same high standards that we have for our regular live performances. So the first main challenge that we had was, how do we record at home? Well, in order to do this, we knew that we had to equip our members with recording equipment to achieve a professional quality outside of a recording studio environment. So they no longer had to use their phones and computer webcams to try to create solid audio products. The second challenge that we knew that we needed to take care of was, or adjust to, I should say, was that the fact that our bands could no longer rehearse or record together as a group. Everything had to be done individually. And so this caused several issues for us as audio engineers on the back end. Mainly that had to do with relative pitch and the timing of each of the audio tracks that we received back. We evaluated several online low latency rehearsal platforms or performance platforms, but unfortunately, none of those could ever deliver what we needed in a very user-friendly way for all of our members. And so we still have not found one of those that works for us. So we still have to adjust on that individual basis. So we recognize those limitations, and we just had to adjust for that in the editing and mixing phases of each of our projects. Training was another challenge that we knew that we needed to address. We quickly saw that there was a drastic difference in the sound quality of each of the tracks that we were receiving from the members of our band. And so in addition to buying home recording equipment, we created training sessions and tutorials that helped our members learn the basics of audio recording. And that helped us kind of equalize the difference and raise the overall quality of our products. Our fourth challenge was communication. It's so vital and so important. And, of course, just like everyone else, we use Zoom calls or Microsoft Teams, phone calls, emails, and text messages. And those help us to address time-sensitive issues and all kinds of planning efforts that we had. And another, I consider it a communication platform, was a business-level Dropbox account. That became so important as we were having to transfer large audio and video files to all the different members who were helping put these products together. And finally, we found that we had to become remote engineers or remote technicians. Myself and the other audio engineer found that we were spending a good bit of time talking to the other members of our band and becoming kind of their tech support as they were working through learning how to use this new equipment and implement these techniques to improve their recordings at home. So once we identified all those challenges, we conducted a needs assessment for all the 50 plus members of our band. And as I said earlier, we used what would have been our normal travel budget, and we allocated that to purchase a variety of equipment, software, and training resources that the members of our band then used to create all of the productions that we have today. You can see just a sampling of some of the things that we purchased for the members of our band, from audio and video editing software, computers, training resources, and of course, all the devices that they needed as well. So finally, this last slide kind of gives you a little bit of the timeline. It's a synopsis of the timeline of our process from the start of the pandemic all the way through our first major televised production. It's important to kind of remember that during this time, we were still adjusting. We were producing regular social media products using only the skills and equipment that we already had. So each of our members, they stepped up, they worked hard every day. But when we really saw a steady increase in the quality of our products was after we were able to dedicate these resources, the equipment and the training, to really help them improve. Since July, we've produced another large-scale holiday television production and many, many more social media campaigns. And we've even, as you've already heard, we've even been able to do some live touring through social media and through these other touring events, and come a long way since the earliest days of the pandemic. So I just want to say thank you for having myself and the rest of the band here today. And I really look forward to any questions that you have later on, and hopefully we can answer some for you.
Thank you, Nick, for that really insightful information. I hope that, and I'm sure that this adaptive mindset that you've been talking about throughout this process really inspires those who are listening to the session today.
Thanks.
And I'd like to introduce our last panelist now. This is the Band of the West's commander and conductor, Major Dustin Doyle. Prior to commanding the Band of the West, he was the Director of Operations for the United States Air Force Band in Washington, D.C., and then he was deployed as the officer in charge of the USAF Central Command Band in Qatar. In June 2019, he took the leadership position of the Band of the West as its commander and conductor. He holds degrees in music education from the University of Maryland, College Park, and a Master's of Wind Conducting degree from the Peabody Institute of the Johns Hopkins University. He has been a commissioned officer in the Air Force since 2009. Major, welcome. From your vantage point in leadership for the Band of the West, you've seen a lot of challenges through the last 8 months. Would you be able to share some of your story for guiding this musical organization through the pandemic? How did you see ways of meeting the mission moving forward that might be helpful to administrative leaders out there and music directors?
Absolutely. Thanks, Ed. I appreciate that introduction. So I'm going to speak briefly here for a few minutes, and I want you to look through the lens of just the senior leader perspective of who manages the organization. So as commander and conductor of the band, so yes, when the concert band gets together, I'm the conductor. But when I'm not on the podium, the rest of my responsibilities are really to manage the organization. And so I'm gonna boil that down into three components here over the next couple of minutes, and that is the mission, the money, and the people. Those are my three topics that I'm going to talk about right now. And so when COVID hit, we were shut down completely, as many of you were. But that doesn't mean that our job stopped. We had to figure out a way to do the job. And so while we heard some great briefs from Justis and from Jaime and Nick and Michele about how we did different components, there was an initial all stop when that happened. And so we had to take a step back and do some reflecting about what is our job. So in the Air Force, you heard it a little bit earlier, honor, inspire, connect, sure. And we've been doing that through live interactions, wearing the uniform out into the community, going out and shaking hands with folks and representing the blue uniform, the Air Force in small town mid-America. So now we couldn't do that. And what that meant, was we lost that ability to connect with our community. And so Justis mentioned earlier in the onslaught of this, yeah, there was a directive to do daily posts on social media. And we say posts, it could have been, some of our members, practicing at home or, taking a picture and writing. So the effort behind that, the intent behind that was to keep that connectivity with our audiences. And then from there, we figured out how to record and do music as a part of it. So from my perspective, keeping that connectivity, keeping that connection with our community was vital as a go-do. And all in an effort to stay relevant. So in the pandemic, everybody was shut down, and so really relied on the teamwork of all the panelists that you heard here to be creative and to move forward. That was the biggest thing, that the mentality of just, hey, we really need to move forward. And so the Simple Gifts video that was alluded to earlier, that took us over a month to put together for just one song. And so as I'm reflecting on that, now I'm forecasting out what's the next big thing coming up that the audience is going to expect a military organization, a military band to do and support. And to me, the first thing was 4th of July. So I went to my team and I'm like, all right, we're 2-3 months out from 4th of July. Let's put a target on the calendar for that. And we have to do something to meet audience expectation. The community is going to want and expect something from us. So how do we meet that mission? And so that's where we started. 4th of July, then it was Veterans Day after July 4th, and then it was the holidays. And so what I did with my leadership team was create the big projects, the big ticket events on the calendar, and then I asked for the members of the organization to help us meet those goals, and they did it in spades. It was fantastic. Money. everything comes down to money, your budget, how you utilize your resources. And so I say that, and Nick was our resource advisor, which means he takes care of our money. He manages that for us, Nick Wellman. And so when I was looking at this, we have a budget of nearly $500,000. So let's say $500,000. 60% of that amount for us is travel. So for us, that's a big chunk of change, which we're not doing right now. We have a stay-at-home order right now. So as we're figuring out how to do all these things, we had to pivot how we were allocating our money. And I say that because this was an awesome time to get a new boss. So in June of 2020, my commander had a changeover, and so I had to tell my new boss, hey, don't cut my budget. Even though it looks like on paper right now, 60% of our operating budget isn't being used. So I had to turn into an advocate for our mission and how we were pivoting and explain that to my boss. So we stayed relevant and we didn't lose those resources. So far that's worked, and we're doing great things for it. And you saw some of the things that we were able to do. All the equipment that we were able to equip our members with, that was part of that change. But also we're looking at different ways inside the building we could use funds differently. So just a simple tech upgrade, laptops and, just equipment that our members use to do the job. We took advantage of the opportunity to spend our funds that way too. So just as you manage the organization, money was one that we're still working through it, and we will continue that way. But it's one that we have to keep our eyes on, or I have to keep our eyes on. And the last piece I just want to talk about here is the people. So the people do the work, and there is, in our small organization, 60 people. Before COVID hit, when we say go do the job, there was a team of operations, about 10 people who manage all the operations for our organization. They plan the jazz band going to Louisiana. They plan the brass quintet going to Florida. You get the point. And so we deconflict on the calendar, and we work with finances to pay for that. And operations was a huge hub for our organization. When that all stopped, it was chaos. And then we went to all online content. What that shift felt like in our organization was ops went completely away, and productions rose to be the new manager of how we were working and how we were doing our job. Those were 10 different people. So 10 people in productions versus 10 people in operations. So these 10 people had to step up and learn how to manage operations for the entire squadron. And that was a big learning curve. So not only do we have really strong productions going on, but now we have to look through it of the lens of managing those productions and seeing it through the lens of an operations-paced of events for the organization. So what we had, sometimes our audio engineers were working 12 different projects at once. Well, they couldn't do that. Or we had maybe a vocalist singing on 5 different projects when my oboe player is playing on 2. And so that work-life balance was thrown off immensely. So we had to throttle back as an organization and manage our people's times, manage our people's expectations, all while we were figuring out what the job was, recreating not music playing to music playing, and going all online right now. There was a time where we were moving so fast. From my perspective, I had to trust my people. I had to, let them go and run and go do, and it turned out fantastic. It worked great, but you don't have your hand on everything, but you kind of massage the direction of where everything's going. But I say all that because I really had to trust my people, and I had to allow them the opportunity to create what the new looks like. So we talked about it earlier, that one timeline in Nick's presentation from March to July to do that production. We learned so much over that timeline, but it was a lot of the Jaimes going out and teaching the rest of our members of our organizations how to do what we were trying to do. So learning those new capabilities and trusting the people and moving forward. So yeah, I guess as I wrap up here, just completely shutting down our mission and our organization to zero, and then figuring out a way to ramp it back up. That was the leadership challenge. And again, the mission, the money, the people, staying relevant, and making it happen through that lens. And so it was mentioned earlier, and I'll just close with this: like, communication still is very difficult, but the texting, the phone calls, the pick up the phone, or the Zoom links and things like this that we're doing right now was that learning curve was very steep, and I just will leave you that you cannot over communicate. So communicate up to my boss, communicate down with all of the folks in our organization, communicate across throughout with my leadership team, and do it as many ways possible. Obviously, face-to-face is the best, but it's just not possible nowadays. So allowing some of my junior members to call my cell phone at Friday night at 7:30, that was kind of taboo a year ago. Well, now it's standard practice. So the encouragement of over communicating throughout as you do your job. But I appreciate this opportunity, and I love giving some of my insight. I hope that was helpful. I look forward to answering any questions anyone has. Thanks, Ed.
Fantastic, Major Doyle. Thank you so much for providing that insight. I'm sure this is going to be helpful for those who lead organizations through both administrative and leadership roles. Well, thank you to all of the panelists who have given your perspectives, who have gone through the reflection period of speaking about transitions both through innovation and adaptation throughout this pandemic era, specifically as they have been implemented by the U.S. Air Force Band of the West. And thank you, attendees, for joining us with this webinar presentation. At this point, we will now transition to a 15-minute Q&A session and field any of the questions that you may be posting in the chat option of this particular platform. So we look forward to getting your questions and furthering on the discussion. Well, hello, everybody, and thank you so much for viewing this streamed session on how an Air Force band adapted to pandemic challenges. We heard from auditions, we heard from our production shop, and social media marketing, as well as our leadership, and from our audio engineer. We had some really fascinating comments come in, and thank you so much for all those that were engaged from coast to coast, from East Coast to West Coast, to Anaheim, and Montana, all the places in between. Thank you for taking the time out of your Friday evening to spend some time with us. We've been forwarding a lot of your comments over to our panelists. And so I'd like to start with you, Michele. We had a comment that might be really insightful to people who are watching today. And it's about the statistics of college degrees for Air Force musicians. Specifically, they were interested in knowing about what kind of demographic we have in the Air Force bands. Are there many with master's degrees, bachelor's degrees? Could you expand a little bit on that?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Ed. So I should preface anything I say with the fact that you are not required to have a college degree to be in the Air Force Band. We definitely have individuals who have won the job without a college degree, and they're phenomenal musicians. That is the only requirement, that you meet the requirements of the audition, which is different for every instrument. So to give you some basic collegiate data, we have over 60% of our members across our 583 jobs in the Air Force Bands have bachelor's degrees. Did I say over 90%? Over 90% with bachelor's degrees, over 60% have master's degrees, and then over 10% now actually hold doctorates of musical arts. Now, if you're depending on what the shred is, the shred means the instrument. It might look a little bit different if we really dove into those numbers. I'm a clarinetist, so I'll say most of my colleagues, a majority, have at least a master's degree, and many of them do have doctorates. So it's definitely very, as far as the collegiate side of the house, clarinetists just tend to be winning the job with higher degrees, whereas it might be different for another instrument. But thanks for asking that great question, and thanks for having us here.
Definitely, Michele. Thanks for that. That was a question by a Mr. Yankee in the chat stream. Next, I'd like to go over to you, Justis. Bill Pelto, who's in the chat stream, was noticing your Eastman connection and talking about the Institute of Music Leadership. And I was wondering if you, having been enrolled in some of those courses, could talk a little bit about the connections between the content that academics are trying to incorporate into these leadership courses, and how that might compare to some of the leadership experiences and OJT, the on-the-job training that you've gotten since being in the Air Force, or maybe some of your other professional experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question from Bill. And as I mentioned in the chat earlier, my experience in the Eastman's Institute of Music Leadership, as it's known now, was really formative. And what it comes down to is everything that's not being a musician. It's being able to speak publicly, being able to write articulately. And it's huge for my job here as our social media manager. As Major Doyle was saying, there's a lot of stuff that he doesn't have his finger on every day, the ins and outs of social media. So I am the voice of the band online, and I need to have the reading, the writing, the speaking skills that sort of go along with that position. Super important to be able to articulate our mission online to the public. So my training at Eastman especially was really, really key. And I would definitely encourage any aspiring professionals who might be listening to get comfortable speaking in front of an audience. It's so, so important. And in our job in the Air Force, we are an asset of public affairs. We are communicators. That's what we do. And music is just our avenue to get there. And I love Bill's follow-up question too, from just a second ago, talking about the methodologies and techniques that we just detailed that we might carry on, because I'm hardly senior leadership at my rank, but we're definitely making the case for getting senior leadership to keep using these live stream technologies to reach people. I alluded to this a little bit in my earlier segment. We are able to reach people all over our geographic area of responsibility for the same cost. And we might send our jazz band out to Alabama, and there are people there we can't reach, either because their town is too far away from where we're going. Maybe the town doesn't have a venue that can fit the band. Maybe the show just gets sold out, sold out. The tickets are free, but maybe the venue's full and they can't get in to see us. With this live stream technology, we can reach anyone with an internet connection, and that's super exciting for us. So it's my hope that we continue to use that as an asset for the connection part of our mission moving forward, even post-pandemic.
Yeah, Justis, great points. Thanks for such a thorough response to some of those comments. Can you just go into a little bit of detail there, because you're talking about a broad internet audience now, the bands are separated into areas of responsibility. Can you talk a little bit about how you mitigate some of those complications as far as who our audience is virtually, but also geographically?
Absolutely, right. So there are 11 active duty Air Force bands. Our particular band covers basically the Gulf Coast states and Georgia and Oklahoma, Puerto Rico. If we put something online and someone from California tunes in, does that mean we're stepping on the toes of our sister band that's stationed out in California? These are questions for commanders to sort out at a certain point, but we use directed advertising to try to target those people who are in our area of responsibility. And diving into social media advertising is, I mean, that is a huge ocean of information. It's constantly changing. Algorithms are constantly changing. Best practices are changing. But that's something that we had to get really familiar with. And as Master Sergeant Wellman alluded to earlier, we used some of our traveling budget for advertising to reach these people. And I create these ad campaigns across Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Google primarily to reach, to target people specifically in the states that we cover.
Great, thanks for that, Justis. Again, Jaime, in regards to video production, some comments have come through, specifically from Susan Hafner, and they're interested in the kind of devices that you thought were important for the musicians to be using in order to make some of these virtual recordings, and as well as the production of your the video recording suite. What were some of the thought processes you had in designing that facility, and what equipment did you think was important for everybody to have? And this might be something that Master Sergeant Wellman can piggyback on as well.
Yes, I won't steal his thunder on the equipment side of it as far as what we equipped folks with, because that was something our supply department jumped on and took care of. As far as giving folks the individual tools to use at their own homes, but that was a big important piece of how we made a lot of our productions work. Because if I mentioned in my segment earlier that you can do it with a cell phone, but we are always trying to get our quality up and to a professional level. So we had a need for folks to have better equipment than just a cell phone. And when I was talking about building on things, that's what I'm talking about. You can get that fancy equipment later. But there were still a lot of folks who found themselves unable to record at home for various reasons. Maybe they live in an apartment where it's just not acceptable to be making noise at all hours. Or something like that that prevented them from being able to do it at home. So I needed to give us, our folks, a space in our building, even though we were all kind of working from home, where they could go into the building without anybody else there and nobody else necessarily to help them, and have some easy to use tools at their disposal so they could get their recording done in that space instead of in their home. So my thought was, I've got to have stuff that's easy to use. So we have what I like to call it, well, I guess it's a pretty widely accepted term, but prosumer video camera. So it's not so complicated that you really need a lot of training to use it. I mean, there's an on button and there's a record button, and if you can do those two things, it's going to start recording. And I kind of had everything set up in such a way that it would be pretty user friendly. So there's a Sony XD cam, if you're curious about the specifics. They make a lot of different models, but you can pretty quickly get to, if you Google that, the ones that are in the kind of prosumer category. And so that's in there. And then I have some lights. And I had them set up in such a way that if you're sitting there, it's a 3-point lighting system, and basically all the users had to do is just come in and plug in the 3 lights, and they're on. Turn out the main lights in the room, and they're going to get a good look of basically infinite black behind them. So there's a black backdrop, but all the lights are pointed at the person. None of the lights are pointed at the backdrop. And then on camera, that ends up looking like you're just you've got nothing behind you. So that's a clean look. It's maybe not the most interesting look, but at least it looks professional and clean. And so that was the idea there. And those lights are just LED panel lights, which you can find on a lot of different sources online that sell that type of equipment. without endorsing anyone in particular, they're pretty easy to find, LED panel lights, and they're not very expensive either. So we have those going in there. And then the other part of it, Sergeant Wellman helped me set up an audio recording station as well with some microphone selections. And I can maybe let him talk about those microphones. But essentially, it was just a way for folks to record themselves. And there's a computer with a digital audio workstation for them to just hit record and get good quality audio as well. So.
Yeah, and so I'll pick up from there on the recording equipment that we tried to outfit our members with. It consisted of a few different needs that we tried to meet. So we found that we would need to meet an audio component, obviously, but as well as in some cases a video component. So we chose a couple of different devices. The Zoom Q2N 4K, and again, these are not endorsements. These were just choices that we made partially based on cost and meeting our particular needs. But the Zoom Q2N 4K was a nice little combination audio and video recorder all in one. That worked well for some of our woodwind and brass instrumentalists in certain situations. And then for those who only needed more of an audio recording component, then we chose, in some cases, a Zoom H4n Pro, kind of a standalone recorder with a built-in stereo microphone element. And then for some of our other users who felt more comfortable with connecting an interface to a computer and getting a little bit more complicated, working with the DAW software and a microphone, we chose a Focusrite 2i2 bundle. It came with the interface, microphone, a cable, a pop filter, and then that bundle also includes software to help start with the recording process. We had one more question about aerosol mitigation that we plan to take into account when we start rehearsing again before the pandemic is over. And we're still really researching that, working on looking at the medical advice that's out there. But one of the things we are looking at is they're generically called air scrubbers that utilize HEPA filtration. Medical experts can really elaborate on this more. There is a lot of research and studies out there to this point, but that's really what we're looking at to help try to cycle airflow and filter it through the room when we're on break to try to mitigate some of those aerosols that may be hanging around in the room. Oh no, Ed, I have to interrupt you. You're still muted. We're still all learning about technology.
Right, there we go. I had my 3-year-old daughter and 5-year-old son wrestling in the next room. So I put it on mute. So as we finish up the time that we have available tonight, I'd like to go through the panel and echo a little bit of what some of the other commenters have mentioned, which is, we are part of this universal global situation right now that's affecting the arts. And we're all in the process, people that are doing public sector arts organizational management, that are professional musicians, record studio managers and technicians. We're all trying to learn lessons through this particular pandemic. And Justis talked a little bit about this, but I'd like to start with you, Major. Wrapping up, what are some lessons that you are internalizing as a commander of a band, as a leader in the arts, for the community and the military that you see are going to be fundamental to life post-COVID or to the arts performance world a year from now?
There is no alternative for live music. When I got my new boss this summer, one of the phrases I used for her, I grew up in the 80s, 70s and 80s, and I said, ma'am, you can be a Pink Floyd fan, and listening to an album of Pink Floyd is a completely different experience than going to a Pink Floyd concert. And so I think a lessons learned is, I'll tell you another real quick one, of a buddy who grew up in West Virginia. And he says that the capabilities that this organization learned and grew over the time is like growing a third arm, quite literally. I mean, nothing was taken away from our capability, but we just now have this extra outreach at our disposal. So I look for using our lessons learned as we continue our live interaction once that's safe for community engagement.
Great. Major, I want to respect the time that we have for the NAMM team, and thank you to all the people that are tuning in to us both today and for future streams. Thank you for taking your time. Thank you so much to the NAMM team, Believe in Music, Claire, Craig, or Boaz. You are an amazing, amazing person. Thank you so much for letting us be part of this wonderful event. And best to everybody, good health and good music to you all.